this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to One Thing Trump Did, available exclusively on the Middle podcast feed. I'm Jeremy Hobson. It can be hard to keep up with everything coming out of the Trump White House, so we try each week to pick just one thing for this podcast and focus on it, break it down in a nonpartisan way with someone who knows what they're talking about. And our one thing this week is a big one. We could do an entire series just on this one thing, but we will see what we can do in a half an hour, and that is China. The U.S. relationship with China, especially in the wake of the trade war that President Trump has started with China. This month, the president put 145% tariffs on goods coming into the U.S. from China, everything from toys to clothes to appliances. China responded with 125% tariffs on U.S. goods. Well, Trump later backed off slightly by exempting things like smartphones and laptops, but overall, we're in a very different place with China than we were when Trump took office. And the Chinese President Xi Jinping recently embarked on a tour of Southeast Asia following the start of the trade war, and President Trump had this to say.
We lost with China over the Biden years trillions of dollars on trade, trillions of dollars, and he let them fleece us. And we can't do that anymore. And you know what? I don't blame China at all. I don't blame President Xi. I like him. He likes me. I mean, you know. I don't blame China. I don't blame Vietnam. I see their meeting today. Is that wonderful? That's a lovely meeting. They're meeting, like, trying to figure out how do we screw the United States of America.
Joining me now is historian and Professor Bill Kirby, who serves as chair of the Harvard China Fund and is the T.M. Chang Professor of China Studies at Harvard. Bill, great to have you on.
Great to be back with you, Jeremy.
So right now, and we are very early in this trade war, that we don't know exactly how it's going to affect the U.S. economy with tariffs at these levels. But one big question is, who is holding the cards right now? Who needs the other more from a trade perspective? What do you think?
Well, I think, it's a no-win game at the end of the day for both sides. The Americans started the trade war. And so then in some sense, they're the aggressors in this regard. I think if on balance, China has more cards at the moment than we do, because our economy has taken an immediate hit just on the prospect of this war. Theirs may well suffer very significantly as well, 1 to 2 points from GDP, if it continues at the levels that we have seen. But you've seen the stock market cratering, the lack of confidence in official decision making, above all, this enormous sense of uncertainty, which is, a death sentence for businesses. Not a death sentence, but in fact, it freezes decision making in businesses, in corporations. Now, do you continue to have production of your products in China, which are for export, or do you have them only for the Chinese domestic market? Do you bring in, if you're an automaker such as Ford, working with the best battery manufacturer in the world, CATL, do you continue to double down on that investment, which is the best prospect for American electric vehicles into the next decade and beyond, or not? At the moment, you don't do anything. And doing nothing is very, very bad for business. And you will see it in corporate reports as to how people are basically, you'll see this phrase a lot in coming corporate reports or in earnings calls, geopolitical uncertainty.
Right.
Well, the real uncertainty is the state of mind of the executive branch of the United States government. The rest of the world is actually quite certain that this is a terrible idea.
Well, and by the way, it can be a death sentence for businesses if there's a small business that doesn't have the cash on hand to go for weeks or months without knowing what's going on and whether they can sell anything, whether they can afford to buy what they need in order to sell things. That could be a death sentence for them. And we've heard also about, ships just sitting in the middle of the ocean because they don't want to actually come into the United States and pay these tariffs. So who knows how much of a death sentence this will be for some businesses. What has struck you about how China has reacted to the tariffs?
China has reacted probably the only way any sovereign country could react to it, by imposing retaliatory tariffs of their own and by shoring up their own internal defenses, by being prepared to be more poised to switch to some degree from an export-oriented economy to one that's based more on domestic consumption. This is something that has been recommended time and again by economists in China, and it hasn't happened over the last decade and more under President Xi. But, if it were to happen, and if China were to invest, as a number of leading Chinese economists suggest it must, in a much better social safety net for the poor and the rural in Chinese society, for farmers in particular, then China would have a new consumer market of 200 to 300 million people who are at present too poor to consume. That's a market the size of North America, or nearly, or of Western Europe. And it is, China has a long runway for economic growth if it chooses the right policies. The United States, under the current administration, it seems not so much.
One big question right now is whether Trump and Xi have actually spoken. Trump says they have. The Chinese embassy says that's not true. Obviously, both sides here know what the actual truth is. But if we're sticking with the poker analogy about who's holding the cards, if Trump says they spoke and they haven't, that seems like a pretty bad position for the U.S. to be in, doesn't it?
I see no reason why the Chinese would not acknowledge that they had spoken. The fact that they had spoken, if it were true, would actually give people a certain sense of confidence that perhaps things can get back on the rails, or at least in a more predictable fashion. But the Chinese side said very, very clearly that we had not spoken. And I don't have any reason. What can one say? It's not as if the Chinese official line is always God's truth. It's not. On the other hand, the Trump administration, Mr. Trump himself, his record for veracity is, shall we say, challenged.
I guess the question is, who's going to pick up the phone first and call the other one? It's just like an issue of pride now for both of them. Do you see, China or the Trump administration saying, okay, fine, let's just call them and get a conversation going?
Well, it isn't actually just a matter of calling, but who's going to kind of give in first. And it seems that the Americans are the ones who are going to give in first. You have these enormous tariffs going up to 145%, as you noticed. Now Mr. Trump says, well, they could be considerably less. Who knows? I mean, the alternative numbers that he's posed are also extraordinarily high by any historic measure and would still constitute the waging of an international trade war. But it seems like the Americans, who have flipped and flopped on this issue left, right, and center since the announcement of the initial tariffs on all the world's countries, seems like we're the ones who are cratering.
Bill Kirby, we haven't done an official audience survey of this podcast. I don't know how many of our listeners are economists or China experts, but let's assume for those people who are not either of those things, how connected are the economies of these two countries right now?
Oh, they're extraordinarily connected, and they're extraordinarily important. They're leading trading partners for either countries. It all depends on what if you look at what Americans buy as consumers, whether it is machinery such as washing machines and so on. So a large number of those will come, household goods from China. 95% of the baby strollers come from China. I once visited a town that its first major industry, Kunshan in Jiangsu province, has a wonderful company called Good Baby. And Good Baby makes an extraordinarily number. There's one county I think it's in northeastern China, that makes approximately, I've forgotten how many hundreds of millions of strollers every year. But that's just one example. Toys is another example. Those are small things, but they also make your iPhone.
Right.
They make your laptop. They make so much of what makes the modern world go round. And so we are integrated at a very high degree. We're integrated also socially and culturally. The large number of Chinese who have settled in this country or who have studied in this country, coming to this country because they believe that American higher education is the best in the world.
Including Xi Jinping's daughter, right?
Even Mr. Xi's daughter has studied in the United States.
Yeah.
And it's higher education is perhaps the one industry in this country that is still number one in the world. And yet it is being attacked mercilessly by the Trump administration. So, and Chinese students are meant to feel endangered. Can they leave the country and get back in? Will their student visas still be valid? All of this is about the chaos of uncertainty. People can't predict what next to do with their lives, what next to do with their businesses, what next to do with their children. And this is a recipe absolutely for economic stasis, for decline.
Do you think that the CEOs of some of the big companies that do business in both countries, Apple, NVIDIA, even Tesla, do they get involved, do you think, in this spat and try to get either side talking to the other?
Well, we have to assume that they do. We know that a number of leading American CEOs have warned against the tariff policy. Even the Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Bessent, has said that the U.S. trade war is, quote, unsustainable. That's from a man who at least voiced strong support for it at the beginning. So it's not Mr. Cook of Apple is keeping a kind of a low profile, and is moving increasing amounts of production or final production of the Apple iPhone to India, the final assembly. But actually most of the parts that will be assembled at the end of the day in India come from China.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that Trump has said all along the way is that China is ripping the United States off. And experts across the political spectrum will say China is not exactly playing fair in trade. They steal U.S. intellectual property, for example. What do you think about that? And do you expect that the tariffs will get China to stop doing any of the things that the U.S. complains about?
Well, of course, there's been intellectual property theft. But on the whole, if you look at where, say, look at the industries in which China is now clearly leading. Look at the electric vehicle industry. They have on the one hand, the design aspects of much of what they do. You have one outstanding company is a company that used to make and still makes cell phones that look a lot like an iPhone. Mm-hmm. And they now make automobiles that look a lot like a Porsche. But the automobiles are entirely different. They're extraordinary new electric vehicles, tight as a drum, handling beautifully. I test drove one in October near Beijing, 0 to 60 miles an hour in less than 2.5 seconds. Wow. They make a Tesla look like a Model T. And Tesla is produced in China as well. But they are outpacing in quality and in innovation. They have a factory there that is 95% automated. And this is not by intellectual theft. This is by innovation. And, it's not by theft that CATL is the leading battery manufacturer in the world. We would have been very wise to work with these companies in their infancy, particularly CATL, to begin the electric vehicle manufacturing in this country. And were we today to pivot and to do what Europe is doing, imagining bringing Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers to Europe, were we to do that to the United States, the result, I think, would be like what we did with Japan in the 1980s. We invited Japanese manufacturing into this country to offset the trade imbalance as we understood it. And those Toyotas and Hondas and Nissans made Ford and Chevrolet and Chrysler better companies because they had to compete now in a domestic market with better cars. And competition is what will drive excellence. Keeping others out of your market through tariffs or by other means simply means that you'll end up with less good stuff.
I want to ask you one more thing before we take a quick break, and that is J.D. Vance, the vice president, recently generated a lot of controversy and more memes about J.D. Vance by referring to Chinese manufacturing workers as peasants. What kind of impact does a statement like that have on the diplomatic relations between the two countries?
Well, apart from being unbelievably ignorant, because if you're working in a factory, you are by definition not a farmer. And the word peasant comes from the French paysan, literally for a farmer. But it's used often usually not in a derogatory, but to refer to particularly poor farmers, historically. But the Chinese term nongmin is the same. It means simply farmer. And it is used by Vance clearly as a derogatory term. But these are people who left their farms in order to enhance their income by working in cities and becoming in time, either legally or not, urban residents in China. Mm-hmm. And so it was deliberately insulting, but it's also just extraordinarily ignorant. You have hundreds of millions of people who have left the farm in order to work in factories in urban areas.
Yeah, it does kind of remind you of something that J.D. Vance and others in the Trump administration got very upset about, which was, Hillary Clinton saying that there was a basket of deplorables. It's the same kind of thing. Stay with us because in a moment we're going to move beyond trade and talk about some of the other potential consequences of growing frostiness between Washington and Beijing. One thing Trump did with Harvard's Bill Kirby. We'll be right back.
Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of to come around here and my wife.
Boom, boom. This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to One Thing Trump Did exclusively on the Middle podcast feed. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This episode, we're talking about the U.S. relationship with China in the wake of a worsening trade war. I'm joined by Bill Kirby, professor of Chinese studies and chair of the Harvard China Fund. Bill, one of the reasons this really matters is not about money, it's about potential military action. So let's talk about Taiwan. The U.S. just sent a warship between China and Taiwan. What's your latest thinking about when and if China is going to invade Taiwan?
Well, I don't believe, despite what some people in the government believe, that there's a timeline within China for retaking Taiwan, be it by invasion, by blockade, or by political negotiation. There's certainly a desire, and an ongoing desire, which would be true probably of any Chinese government, to see Taiwan be made part politically in one form or another of China. And of course, there's a strong desire in Taiwan not to become part of the People's Republic of China. This we all know. But what we also know, if you study this at all, is that the best guarantee of Taiwan's security and of peace in the Taiwan Strait is a good and forward-looking relationship between Washington and Beijing. Having no dialogue, whether anyone is picking up the phone or not, having negotiations through, half-baked press conferences, this kind of thing does not assist Taiwan's security in the least. It leads Taiwan to be considerably more insecure. They don't know, and if you look at American actions elsewhere in the world, Mr. Trump seeming to side with the Russian position very dramatically on Ukraine, is the United States a reliable ally and a reliable supporter of Taiwan? By law, by the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, the Americans are obliged to provide Taiwan with weapons that will help defend it. They're not obliged automatically to defend it, and the sense that whether, the sense of reliability of the word of the United States is not very high at the moment. Now, this poses all kinds of risks. It's not because it could lead, I suppose, to extensive risk-taking on the Chinese side, figuring, well, under Trump, why not do something under Trump because he won't intervene rather than wait for the next administration? But I think that's a very risky process because you really do not know what will happen. The American support of Taiwan began in 1950 after the American government had drawn a pretty clear security line in Asia Pacific, saying that we would not intervene in the Chinese Civil War. But once the Korean War broke out, we did intervene. And so it's not a predictable operation. That's number one. Number two is the situation in the cross strait may be dangerous, to be sure, but the most dangerous place in East Asia by far is still Korea. North Korea continues to have nuclear weapons, now engaged in warfare in Ukraine on the doorstep of Europe. And the one thing that I don't think it takes much of a crystal ball to predict, that unless the United States and China can work together toward a denuclearized North Korea, which would be in the strategic interests of both countries, and work toward an eventual unification of the Korean Peninsula, presumably under the South, with some arrangement that the Americans would then in time go home, unless some real diplomacy like that were to happen, South Korea will have nuclear weapons. Japan can have nuclear weapons in another week or two. Taiwan can have nuclear weapons. Does this make this area safer? This is bad news for Chinese foreign policy and actually dangerous also for the United States. And one wished at the moment that there were real statesmen in office taking the long view of the big issues facing U.S.-China relations rather than fussing about rates of tariffs that almost surely are not going to stick.
It's interesting, North Korea, you almost forget about North Korea for years, and then it comes back all of a sudden, and he's shooting missiles into the sea and threatening people, Kim Jong-un.
I mean, you have to remember, it was North Korea and the actions from the North Korean leader invading the South in June of 1950 that led to the United States and China actually being at war one with another, not a declared war, for 3 years, 3 bloody, bloody years, in a totally unnecessary war that is still remembered bitterly on both sides.
So do you think, just going back to Taiwan, do you think that at this point, if, let's say, in the next 6 months, China said, okay, you know what, we're watching what's happening in Ukraine and that the U.S. is kind of backing away from its support of Kyiv, and also we don't like this tariff situation, we're just going to go ahead and take Taiwan right now. Would the U.S., do you think, respond militarily?
I don't know, and I would hope that the Americans would not say what they would do in this regard. Under President Biden, he made it very clear that he would respond militarily. The state of our capacity to respond at the moment is not 100% clear to me. The chain of command seems more than a little bit unclear at the moment in the Pentagon. But the risk is enormous because, the great British historian A.J.P. Taylor once wrote, war is never inevitable until it breaks out. But once it breaks out, almost anything is possible. So think of what a war would mean if it were an actual war. First of all, Taiwan, of the 3 economies, U.S., China, and Taiwan, Taiwan is the one that's actually booming right now. It's at the absolute global center of semiconductors. It is the home of the most leading AI companies in the world. It's the one place when one visits you can feel a bounce in the step of individuals there because the economy is doing so well, and they seem somewhat less worried about a coming war than some of their allies in the U.S. or by some in China. We shall see. But if China waged a war over Taiwan, China's international economic relations with the United States, with Europe, with Japan, Korea would probably suffer an irreversible blow. And it would take a generation to recover, or perhaps more. And what would China gain? China would gain a beautiful island, to be sure. It would gain it might or might not gain intact this great semiconductor industry. But above all, it would gain a population the size of Shanghai that doesn't want to be part of the People's Republic of China. The risks for China are very high in this. And it's not automatic that, as the Russian invasion of Ukraine showed, that the larger power, the seemingly much larger power, automatically overwhelms the smaller. And finally, we have to remember that Taiwan has a navy, Taiwan has an air force, Taiwan has the capacity to bomb Chinese cities. Are we going to sacrifice Xiamen or Shanghai for making Taiwan part of the motherland? It's an enormous risk. And if it doesn't work out well, you'll probably have a new Chinese government.
Oh, that's interesting. So let me ask you about that. Trump obviously just won an election here in the U.S. There's not another one until the midterms in about a year and a half. But what is the situation in China right now? Will she face any pressure at home if, let's say, the tariffs start to bite within China, or if, as you say, a Taiwanese invasion goes all wrong?
Well, the latter for sure, if that were to go all wrong, either he or the entire system. Maybe not immediately, but it would be a major, major blow, not only to prestige, but to the leadership that allowed it to happen. The American pressure on China almost surely in the short run strengthens President Xi. People have to rally around the flag of their leader when the country is being, from their point of view, attacked in this economic war.
Look no further, by the way, than what's happening in Canada right now, also on that front. The U.S. comes after you, and then all of a sudden, this party, the Liberal Party that was down 20 points in the polls, is looking great for the Canadians.
Yeah. And, so I think there'll be the immediate thing is that it strengthens the hand of the leader. It also means that the security apparatus goes overtime into looking for any areas of dissent. When you have this kind of external attack, you also get stronger internal security in a greater levels of censorship and so on. That's in the short run. In the long run, the Chinese economy has serious problems of its own unless there's a redirection toward a more consumption-oriented economy that allows for the poorest in the country, hundreds of millions of people, to begin to be part of this economic miracle, and to have real social security. Xi Jinping, unusually, and really he's kind of an outlier, but he's the decision maker. He is a communist, of course, but he doesn't believe in socialism. That is to say, he is against a welfare state. He is against giving people the health care or education and so on that they would need in order not to save so much of their income for the illness that will surely come, or for the education that they want to give their children. As he said, welfareism makes people lazy. Now, he may have more in common with Mr. Trump on this front than on others, because he sounds a little bit like a conservative Republican when he says that. But he does believe it, and it is one of the reasons why the Chinese economy has not bounced back since COVID.
Let me ask you about another player in the region. The U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was just in the Philippines, which also just did joint exercises with the U.S. military. How does the Philippines fit into the tension between the U.S. and China?
Well, the Philippines fits into it in a way. Well, first of all, it's historically both an American colony, and then given its independence, and an American ally, except under Duterte, under the presidency of Mr. Duterte. But it is also a neighbor, as it were, with the territory that China has claimed in the South China Sea. Now, we have to remember that that territory was claimed not just by the People's Republic of China, but also by the previous regime, the Republic of China, under Chiang Kai-shek. So it is not an altogether new claim, but this is the one government that has the capacity to act and to secure that perimeter, as it were, in a way that offends mightily the Philippines and Vietnam in particular, and in a way that has been declared not in accord with international law. So the Philippines has lots of skirmishes with China over this. It's not as if the Philippines is seeking to itself exert sovereignty over this open area, but seeking, like the United States, to maintain it broadly as international waters. But at the end of the day, the Philippines will have to reckon, particularly under Mr. Trump, how reliable an ally is the United States? Will they be there when we need them if there is a confrontation, say, with China? Because a confrontation between the Philippines and China, either over a small island or anything large, is not a fair fight.
Which brings you back again to the situation in Ukraine. How front and center is what's going on there to the relationship between the U.S. and China?
I think it's very front and center. And I think both, first of all, we have to take a step back. And I think China is partly to blame for the situation as it evolved in Ukraine. Mr. Putin, went to Beijing for the 2022 Olympics and signed an agreement with Xi Jinping of a friendship without limits. And 2 weeks later, Putin invades Ukraine. So the Chinese had to have given the Russians a blank check. Not that they were paying for it, but I mean to say to allow them to go ahead, because it's very doubtful in my mind that the Russians would have done so if the Chinese were utterly opposed to doing so. So China's relations with Europe have suffered terribly because they are seen as having helped to unleash this war. And they've done very little to help stop it. But at the end of the day today, the question is whether the United States, which came immediately to the aid of Ukraine and to the diplomatic and moral support of Ukraine, whether we are consistent and reliable as a friend and an ally, not just with Ukraine, but also with our NATO allies, and as we were just discussing with Taiwan. If you are inconsistent, or if people cannot believe your word, and these are two things that sadly seem pretty central to the American White House today, then people will draw lessons from it. And if the Americans walk away from their involvement, wash their hands of the people of Ukraine, surely in time, China will take that as a sign that they would not be so strong in the defense of Taiwan.
Bill Kirby, if I were to invite you back on this show in a month, do you think the trade war and the tariffs between the U.S. and China will be gone by then or down to next to nothing?
They won't be down to next to nothing because even under Biden, they were about 20%. But they will be much less. My guess is there will still be nit and picking, and there will be lots of inconsistency on the American side. To put together a comprehensive package in this regard will take some time, and it will take probably more pain on the part of American consumers and American exporters. I was just reading this morning that Chinese exports of pork to the United States this week, simply compared to last week, are down 79%. I mean, not American exports of American pork, to China. Ditto at an even higher level with soybeans. What happened the last time that Trump started a trade war? Well, it led to enormous loss of markets by American farmers. I guess they must be our peasants. And you and I and other taxpayers in this country, including farmers, bailed them out by massive subsidies.
Right, billions of dollars.
Billions and billions of dollars. So it was a trade war that we paid for twice, as it were. And we have every prospect of repeating this if we continue to follow this no-win economic strategy.
Let me ask you one more thing. You mentioned down by more than 70%. We're hearing that the travel between Europe and the United States, between Canada and the United States, the tourism is down something like 70% right now. If you were to get on a plane between the U.S. and China right now, would it be mostly empty?
No. Well, I'll find out because I'm going next week.
Oh, okay.
And I was there 3 weeks ago, and the plane was pretty full. So, but there may be fewer flights. So it's a little tough to tell. It's not. Right. We're not talking yet empty planes, but I think air traffic is definitely down. It has never bounced back since COVID. But yeah, I think the reputational damage to the United States, and many people have remarked on this. Building up a good reputation as a country the soft power of a country takes generations, and destroying it can be a matter, as we have seen, of months. I remember when I was much, much younger, the international reputation of the United States, particularly in Europe, but also in parts of Asia during the era of the Vietnam War, and particularly in Canada also, was very, very negative. And I never thought in my lifetime I would see it so negative again, but we may be headed there. We need to take the long view in this relationship. China has been here forever. The United States has been around less long than the last of 24 Chinese imperial dynasties. We need to have a little sense of proportion, and we also need to remember that whenever the United States and China have worked together, it has been good, indeed very good for both countries, and whenever we have worked apart or been in conflict, it has been very bad for both countries.
That is Bill Kirby, professor of China Studies and chair of the Harvard China Fund. Bill, it's so great to talk to you as always.
Thank you, Jeremy. Take care.
And thanks to you for listening to One Thing Trump Did. It was produced by Harrison Patino. Our next middle episode will be in your podcast feed later this week. We're talking with journalist Derek Thompson of The Atlantic about his new book, Abundance, which explores our nation's lack of progress on key issues like affordable housing infrastructure and climate change. If you like this podcast, rate it, write a review. Our theme music was composed by Noah Haidu. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Talk to you soon.
You see it instantly. It's Cold Water Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I actually drive better when I'm high. It heightens my senses, calms me down. If anything, I'm more careful. Honestly, it just helps me focus.
That's probably what the driver who killed a 4-year-old told himself. And now he's in prison. You see, no matter what you tell yourself, if you feel different, you drive different. So if you're high, just don't drive. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.